Today I'm going to discuss the most important topic is the translation of short stories. Literary translation is an involving the transposition and interpreting of creative works such as novels, short prose, poetry, drama, comics, strips and film strips from one language and culture into another. Literary Literary translation is an involving the transposition and interpreting of creative work. So basically, in this process of translations, we have to do the process of transposition and interpreting while we translate the actual sense, while we translate the actual meaning of the lines from one language to the another language of creative works such as novels, short stories, poetries, drama, short stories, comic strips, film strips from one language and culture into the another. If a language belonging from the other country and we have a language and cultural values of our country, we have to translate the culture and traditional values of lines and the meaning and the sense of the source text. Either it is belonging from the other country, either it is belonging from the other language. It can also involve intellectual and academic work like the physio- philosophy publications, philosophy, physics papers, arts, and literary criticism. So it can also involve intellectual. Intellectual is the meaning while we try to understand the actual meaning, and academic work like the phys- physiology publications, philosophy, and physics papers, arts and literary criticism. Translations creative Translating creative works requires the ability to read between the lines. While we try to translate the one language into the another language, it's required to read the lines again and again and in a very deep manner in order to understand the actual sense and the actual meaning of the lines. The process requires to love the reading in the genres. The process requires to love the reading in the genres. So, what is the source text? Either it is belonging from the um, newspaper, short story, novels, film strips. We have to learn. We have to love it while we try to translate into the another language. In the process, translating and be both intimated with the writer and the nuisance of language, culture, thoughts, and message. In the process of translating and be both intimate with the writer and the nuisance of language जो उसमें है processing and culture, thought, and messaging. So whatever um, thoughts, nuisance, culture, and messaging all are have to translate into the another language. In order to translate prose poem from Dutch into English, have to read as many published prose poem as as possible in Dutch and in English in order to translate prose poem. While in order to translate prose poem from Dutch into the English and have to read the as many published prose poem as possible in Dutch and in English. So while we try to translate the prose poem from Dutch into English, we have to read as many published prose poems. So we have to read the other published prose poem while we try to translate into the Dutch as possible in the Dutch in English. This will help the reader to grasp the style, subtitle, the context, and soul of prose poetry in order to deconstruct the Dutch and reconstruct the English. They this will help the reader. This will help the reader to grasp the style, the subtitles, the context, and the souls of prose poetry in order to deconstruct the Dutch and reconstruct the Dutch English. So, this is the process of translation. While we translate any kind of a prose poem, any kind of a novel, we have to understand the style, the subtitles, the context, and a soul of prose poetry or novels. So, in this process, we have to read the other prose poems, other novels in order to understand the subtitles and the styles. So, the process of translation is a very deep manner. We have to understand all the literary devices and the literary meanings of the source text while we try to translate into the target test. Remember to keep on top of your language. Remember to keep on top of your language. Language is a fluid entity, the constantly change and evolves. Dialect change, semantic change, new words are coined, old words die and are reborn. Remember to keep on top of your languages. Languages is a fluid entity that constantly changes and evolves. Dialect change, semantic change, new words are coined, old words are dies and are reborn. So, in the literary world, there are literary devices of each and every language which are which are very fulfill of the and involve from lots of constantly change and evolves. Dialect change, semantic changes, new words are coined, old words are dies and reversed. So we have to also focused which kind of a literary devices are dies, which are the literary devices, words are dies, which are not in used, which are not in used while we while we doing a translation into the another language. So this kind of a new literary sense and literary devices are reborn and words are reborn in the literary world. So we have to know in order to read the lots of poetries, lots of novels, we comes to know that what is the latest and reborn literary devices and dialects and subtitles and which kind of a changes have happening um, through the in the literary world through the writers, through the criticism, through the critics. The teeth of the comb is full of fables and political allegories that catch and reimagine the Syrian reality in new and insightful way. Some of these stories are no longer than a sentence or two. Teeth of the comb is full of the fables and political allegories. So here we have a um, um, poem, The Teeth of the Comb, is full of fables and political allegories that catches and reimagine the Syrian realities in new and insightful way. Some of these stories are no longer than a sentence or the two. So, The Teeth of a Comb is a short story or which is full of fables and political allegory and which we can imagine the real world, so this kind of a Syrian reality in new and insightful way. And some of these stories are no longer than a sentences and or two. So this kind of a literary work is also we have in the literary world. So here we have a conclusion. Literary translation is an involving the transposition and interpreting of creative works. Basically, in this process, we try to transposing and interpreting while we try to understand the sense and the meaning of the lines, such as involves short prose, poetry, drama, comic strip, film strip from one language and culture into the another. What is the process of translations of short stories? So here we have a process of short translation of short stories. So uh, first of all, you have to follow the same structure while you write your answer in your examination sheet. First of all, you have to define the short story definitions. Literary translation is an involving the transposition and interpreting of the creative work such as a novel, short story, prose, poetry, drama, comic strip, film strip from one language and culture into the another. It can also involve the intellectual and academic work like the physiology publications, philosophy, physics papers, arts, and literary criticism. Translating creative works requires the ability to read the between the lines. The process requires to love the reading in the genres. In the process, translating be both intimated with the writer and the new sense of language, culture, thought, and message. In order to translate prose poem from Dutch into the English and have to read as many published prose poem as uh, possible in Dutch and in English. This will help the reader to grasp the styles, subtitles, context, and the soul of prose poetry in order to reconstruct the Dutch and reconstruct the English. Remember to keep on the top of your language. Languages is a fluid entitled the that consistently changes and evolves. Like for example, dialect change, semantic change, new words are coined, old words are died and reborn. The Here we have an example of a short story. Short story The Teeth of Calm is full of fables and political allegory that catches and reimagines the silent reality in the new sight way. You can write your conclusion in your own word. So I hope you like this video, which is very important according to your examination point of view. So you have to write your answer um, in a same structure. Otherwise, you will deduct your marks. Put the lots of example in your answer and write your answer in a proper way.